it is about redirecting. When you hear a child ask, "Can I play?" we want to redirect that statement to, that question to, "What are you playing?" If a child asks, "Can I play?" they don't necessarily have all the information they need to know if they actually want to play. Often when we redirect them to ask the children, the group of children or the child, "What are you playing?" and they get the full answer, the full lowdown on what's happening, sometimes they actually are not interested in playing that thing. So step one would be to collect all the information, learn what the storyline is that's happening, and then the child can make a better, more informed choice if they would like to join what's happening. And then from there, you can start establishing some of the rules and negotiate what's happening with the playing. Leslie, do you have anything more you want to say about what are you playing versus can I play before we head to the next thing?
I think you have it covered, Aimee. Thank you. That's it. It's key. It's key. We always redirect can I play. So just let you know.
Okay. So with that, we will head into tonight's presentation, Together Play, Scaffolding Children's Interactions. And I think it's just really important. I want to start off by letting everyone know that rather than just reacting to problems when they occur at the cooperative school, our teachers actually have an ongoing curriculum that they've created in self-control, social participation, and human development. And I think our teachers would agree, and hopefully you do too, that helping children learn to take care of themselves, each other, and their space, which sometimes that space is school and sometimes that space is home, and all the time that space is earth, is the most enduring thing that we teach. So tonight I want to talk a little bit about how to scaffold children's interactions with each other. And before I move on, I don't want to make an assumption, especially because some questions came through on the co-oping self-study reflection form about that word scaffolding. And it's such a common word that teachers use in their work, mainly because scaffolding is what they do like 24/7 in their role. But just what that exactly means. And I would say the meaning is really similar to a scaffolding on a building, how the scaffolding is there as a temporary support as the building is, getting more structurally sound. And that is exactly what a teacher's or parent's scaffolding does for a child. It's intended to provide just enough and temporary support in order to release the responsibility fully over to the child. So in education and in parenting, scaffolding comes in the form of language and modeling, showing children how to do things and narrating them through the steps in a process. And then I would say with the goal of offering as little support as needed, adding back in support when it's needed. And yeah, I think that's all. I think that covers it. Let's head into a quick overview of our agenda for our session tonight. So tonight we are going to learn about proactive scaffolding strategies and reactive scaffolding strategies, and then we'll end our session with a tip for home, as we always do. Okay, and yes, I want to talk a little bit about language before we head into our number one. So just before we get started, let's circle back to language, which was our meeting topic from last month. And last month I was sharing that our language is the most powerful management tool that we have. In everything that we say to children, we're trying to confirm the best in them and preserve our relationships of care and trust. And as you know, due to time constraints, our September parent education session was incomplete. And the complete version, I recorded the whole presentation from start to finish, and that is available on the school's YouTube channel. In case you didn't have an opportunity to watch it, I just want to highlight the 3 R's of language, which was the main section we did not get to, but ties into our work tonight. So for the 3 R's, we use language to reinforce desired behaviors, and that is a proactive strategy. It can be used for scaffolding, like we'll talk about tonight. We use language to remind children what to do before they veer off course, and that's another proactive strategy. And then finally, we can use language to redirect children when their self-control fails, and that is a reactive strategy. Okay, let's jump right in. So we're going to head to our first part of our agenda, which is proactive strategies. And proactive work happens before children are actually veering off course, kind of like we were talking about with the reminding language just a moment ago. The steps that we as parents take before challenging situations arise has a much more powerful and lasting impact than any of our reactive moves. So if we hover in this proactive mindset, we are really getting a lot more mileage out of our work that we're kind of front loading and feeding into development that will be longer lasting. The more time we devote to this proactive work, the more skills our children develop, and the more they're encouraged by the positive effects of their behavior on themselves and others. And it's why it's so important to kind of think about it. So on the next slide, I just want to talk a little bit more about mindset with being proactive. So when you are proactive, you're anticipating and you're laying the groundwork and you're front loading for success. The mindset of being proactive is thinking, what can I do as a parent to set my child or my children or this group of children up for success? And when you co-op, it would be being in the mindset of thinking, what can I do as a co-oper to set the class up for success, anticipating what may happen in situations, and then making intentional moves before challenges actually arise lays important groundwork and front loads situations for success. So that's kind of the thought behind it. And just a couple things that you might want to anticipate. On the next slide, I have if we are going to be in this mind space of anticipation, what kinds of things are we learning to anticipate? And of course, there's many, but you might have noticed, and I've talked a little bit about it before, we like to keep things to threes when we're working with our early childhood children. So in sticking with that spirit, just 3 major things to be on the lookout for are limited space, limited materials, and limited time. So when you're in your anticipating mind space, you can start looking around to see if there's going to be a trouble with space. You can start thinking about if you can set up children in a different space. Like if you see, for instance, children at the park or at the school, if you co-op, if they're collecting or harvesting ingredients for a mud kitchen project that they're doing, if they're making a stew and they really want to get those leaves that and they happen to be at the bottom of the slide, for instance, you can anticipate that that will be trouble because the space there will have some conflicts. If anyone wants to use the slide and children are standing directly at the bottom, there could be some collision. So you want to start anticipating and looking for possible areas of conflict based around space. And then same thing with materials. You can start to see if something's in high demand and then start thinking if those resources could be divided. Are there plenty that there can be some sort of, enough for all, or some way to find out a way to divide piles so that everyone has something? Or will you need to, in the case of really limited materials, will you need to set up a pattern of turn taking around the desired material? And for time, limited time, what I think really about this is just anticipating transitions and anticipating stopping points, and then making sure that those are really mapped out for children. Are they aware that an upcoming stop is nearing? Just an example, at school, one of the jobs is that the children ring the bell to signal that it's time to clean up, to move to the next part of the schedule. But in addition, and I'm just giving an example from when I co-oped in the tracks, but Leslie rang the very large bell that's attached to our school just to call out that an upcoming stop was nearing. So that wasn't the cleanup bell, but it was a warning bell. And you can kind of think how maybe setting a timer at home before you actually, just to alert the children that the transition is coming, I guess is what I wanted to say about that. Okay, so those are some things you're anticipating, and you're in your proactive mind space. You're trying to front load for success. And so how can you do that? Let's, again, we'll focus on 3, but let's just stick to these 3 key proactive strategies. There's, of course, it's not an exhaustive list. There's many, many others, but these are some hallmarks of our school. So we, beyond honing our anticipation skills, we are going to use strategies like making a plan, and that can happen. Sometimes a planning meeting happens, and sometimes that happens more. So a planning meeting would be with a larger group of children, and sometimes that just happens one-on-one. And then the 1, 2, 3 we'll talk about. And finally, we'll talk about role playing, how to role play with scenarios. Okay, so the first proactive strategy that I'll share tonight is making a plan. And this is really just when an adult is stepping in to negotiate the rules of play, probably the distribution of materials, and the reason behind all of this, as with any proactive strategy, is because we're hoping to reduce conflict, and we're hoping to create a level playing field. We're hoping the children can arrive, what our teachers call the agree to agree, that they are all buying into this. And then we hope to front load for some success. We will, along the way, be showing children the skills they need to get along with the other children involved. And so some of this has to do with traffic management, which goes back to the anticipation of space. When you are kind of getting the lay of the land and thinking about what things could potentially go wrong. So some of establishing rules is about the traffic management, but then also it can just be the rules of the play or the rules of the, expected behaviors in that situation. The slide, for instance, The slide at our school, we have a double slide where there's, two slides kind of connected, well, right next to each other. And there's a whatever, like a divider in between, I guess is the word. And there's clearly designated that there's two different separate spaces, although they are connected. And a lot of times traffic management and the agree to agree has to do with deciding one slide is an up slide and one slide is a down slide if there's a large group of children using it. So they climb up the one side and they go down the other. If only people are interested in rolling bike tires down the slides, then there's a different agree to agree and a different traffic management rule established beforehand. So there will have to be a traffic management plan about how do you collect your bike tire once it rolls down, because you can't run right down the berm while someone else is rolling a bike tire down. And what will be the path that you take to get back to the top? The slide at a public playground. You've probably had or maybe I've had tons of these run-ins. Maybe you have too. I should say it like that, where I think it's okay for children to climb up the slide, and another family that's there thinks that they should not do that and they should only use the stairs or, the other method of getting to the top, and that the slide would just be for going down. So there's another traffic management, establishment of rules of the game, rules for expected behavior. So that's kind of what I mean by that number one step. And then narrate before joining a space. We talked a lot about narration at our September meeting when we were talking about language, but just especially if you're joining a public space with your child for a group play date, or just there will be other kids from the neighborhood that you might not necessarily know in the space. It's kind of a really nice proactive strategy to take a moment, standing back a bit, to describe what's going on. You could name the play structures that you see. You could talk about the other children that you see. If you know the children's names, you could name them. You can describe the movement of what the children are doing, if they're going slowly or quickly, if they're climbing or not. And then you can brainstorm with your child or your children how they will join, or what they might need to join in. And then you're ready to join the play space. So sometimes at the beginning, you might have to do the work of introducing your child. Eventually, we'd like them to take on that task. And if it isn't obvious, this is when you want to do the prompt in the manner that I shared for our co-oping minute. You would say, what are you playing? And then you can learn about the game or the play or the storyline that's happening on. You might then need to help create a pattern in the play, like, oh, you're cooking. Can we gather stones for your soup? Or other ingredients. You could also, if that doesn't seem to jive, you might help by doing some sort of pattern of idea making. So first, we'll do what that child wants to do, and then we can do what this child wants to do. And then finally, afterwards, you want to go back when the play is done and you're at home, and have a reflection on what worked and what didn't work. And maybe what you might do differently next time, what you could try differently. And that is all, like I was saying, our proactive work really pays in the end much more than our reactive work. And so this kind of sounds like a lot of unnecessary work, but it really isn't. You're making an investment that will change your life and how your child connects with other children. And also, I alluded to this a bunch in our language parent education, but doing this, making a plan, establishing rules, joining a space, having a post play, and we could also just say like post replace play, post hangout, post whatever, reflection shapes conversations you will have when your child is a teenager and you are no longer standing next to them during the tricky situations they might encounter. So like a post-school reflection, but they would get used to this idea of making a plan. Also, a little bit in one of the language cues, I alluded to a cue that our teachers use a lot, which is just, what is your plan? When you are constantly engaging in this process of making a plan, then your child knows what that means. And eventually you can just ask, what is your plan? And they can start to tell you that. Okay, so that's our first proactive strategy, making a plan. The second one I want to share is the 1, 2, 3. And I was devoting way too much time to finding a chain with 3 links that was going to work. And I had to just stop doing that. It's like, this is unnecessary. As Leslie reminded me, this is a nursery school. So we have 2 chains, but really pretend there's 3. I use the chain because our teachers do link when they're giving a 1, 2, 3, they actually show the children that those steps are connected. You're going to hang up your backpack, wash your hands, follow the stepping stones to the classroom. And then when they get to the classroom, there's another 1, 2, 3. So the 1, 2, 3 helps children anticipate what's coming up and exactly what needs to be done. And it breaks really bigger, what seems to be too big to manage tasks, maybe overwhelming, we could say. So it breaks those big tasks into manageable pieces, like getting ready for bed. Seems pretty, that's a lot. Like, you want me to go from here where I'm playing all the way to being like in my bed, dressed, ready to go. So there's a lot of steps that seemingly happen in there, but if you can break it to a 1, 2, 3, it's a lot smoother. 3 steps for cleaning your room, right? If just cleaning your room, whoa. But if there's just 3 things to do, then that becomes easy to remember and more manageable. And you can replace, getting ready for bed with anything, eating dinner, leaving for school. I also, checklists kind of fall on this too. Another proactive strategy where you're setting the child up for success. You're telling the child exactly what needs to happen and then turning over some of the self-control. The child has a little bit of control to manage a checklist. I put some examples here. We always take names off when we share something, except for this is my own child. So I figured I was making the decision to leave it on here. And these are Reed's morning and Reed's afternoon. And this is from when Reed was in the leaves class. So he had this checklist. He could not read those words, but there were pictures that showed him exactly what to do too. And I just he would have this in the morning. You can tell how many times he used a dry erase marker on it because it's like super smudged. And we set this up with making a plan ahead of time. The morning was pretty hectic for me. And I wanted him to take some control and ownership of it. And I wanted to set him up for success and be proactive instead of reactive. So these were expectations. And in our planning meeting, we talked about that he didn't have to do those in that order. It was just the order that, like, I had them on there. He could pack his backpack and then he could eat breakfast. So he had a little bit of control with all of that. And then he had to do all the things first before he could do some free choice. And it was motivating for him to want to get to a book or a game or going outside or playing inside. So he was more likely to do those things quickly. And then he had an afternoon list as well. And so those checklists, of course, there's more than 3 steps in a checklist, but it breaks a bigger task into manageable pieces in the same way that the 1, 2, 3 would do. I keep forgetting to ask you, Leslie, if you have something to say, feel free to jump in. Anything more about the 1, 2, 3?
No, those are great. And I'm really glad that you brought some checklists to the list, to the meeting. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. And then the third proactive strategy I'm going to share today, definitely not the last proactive strategy that exists, but is role playing. So role play scenarios. And role playing just prepares children to deal with social dilemmas. They are thinking, this is the what if. You're imagining something in a different way than it is right now. Like, what if, and then we give a scenario and we talk about what you would say and what would you do. Like what if you are at the park and there is pushing at the top of the slide? Like, what would you do? What would you say? Or what if you are at the playground with children you don't know and someone starts chasing you? You can actually act these out. So, which is what I have 2 strategies that I've used with both students that I teach and my own children, that I message charades. So at our school, we teach students to say it with an I. That was one of the cues on the handout on one of the handouts. There's 3 handouts attached to our September meeting, but to say it with an I. So that can also be called an I message. And in I message charades, you actually have a scenario, and then you pick people to be characters in that scenario. You lay it out. Okay, so I'm going to be the kid at the top of the slide, and you're going to be the kid at the bottom of the slide. And I am going to be trying to slide down, and you're going to be trying to climb up, and we're going to act it out. And then usually I think it's best if there's someone who's like the moderator. So they say 1, 2, 3 action, and the action happens, and the participants, who it can be adults as well, are acting this scenario out. And then the moderator just says, okay, freeze. And then as a group, we say, okay, so what will we say? What will we do? And we start putting words into the situation so that when I am actually in the situation, I've thought this through a little bit and I have something to draw on. I keep back to that one day teenager. I think these, of course, the scenarios will get a little bit more weighted, right? Or I don't know. Like, what would you say if you're with a group of people and someone wants to steal something from a store, right? What are you going to do then? What are you going to say? What are you going to do? Where are you going to go? What if you're driving with a friend in the car and like they're texting on their phone and that just doesn't feel safe for you? What are you going to say in that moment? What are you going to do? Are you just going to sit there? So those are the kinds of things. I don't know that I can get my one day teenagers to role play it, like act it out. I mean, I would love it if they would, but I think probably more it will be a conversation. I can tell you that early childhood aged children do enjoy acting these things out. And then once I failed to mention, once the moderator freezes the action and you kind of come up with some scenarios of what you would say or do, then you can do a take 2. and have the role play start from the beginning and go on. But this time there will be the people can actually say something or do something to confront the conflict, to confront the dilemma. And then similarly, step into the story would be just like this, where you're thinking about social dilemmas, but you can use something that's actually happening in a book that you're reading. So what you would do is, I'm thinking about a book that I read that I like to read with my kids, The Invisible Boy. And it is about a boy who just has, probably, although the author doesn't identify him as an introvert, I would say he probably is one. He's quiet and he does not demand a lot of attention. Therefore, he is easily ignored by his teacher, and he is easily ignored by the classmates. And there's a lot of feelings that happen because of that. And the illustrator does like a pretty brilliant job of showing those feelings. Eventually, and actually there's some intentional inclusion. I'm sorry, not inclusion, exclusion happening, really hurtful exclusion. And a new student joins the class, and the trajectory of this character kind of changes, all because he extends a kindness. That is, the introverted child extends a kindness, and because they can connect, with a talent, which is, Leslie talks a lot about that with our tracks when they're nearing their transition to kindergarten, looking for likes and interests of others. But at any point in that book, we can freeze the book and step into the story. And I would say something like, okay, right here, let's step into the story and you pretend that you are Brian. How are you feeling right now? Like, tell me about what's going on. Like, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? And then I can step into the book and I can be Justin, and I can talk about what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling. And you can also rewrite the story. What if you were the author? What would you say here in this part? And kind of assuming the role of someone else in this situation to help kind of experiences, maybe go through an experience a little bit that you've never dealt with, but most certainly probably will at some point in your life. Okay, hopefully that all made sense. Leslie, do you have more on any of those?
It's perfect. So far, so good.
Okay, well, there's loads of other ways to be proactive. And a lot of times it's as simple as just using proactive language, which is way back to last month's topic. Many of the cues that I shared at the end of that presentation are proactive, and just narration is often proactive. Mostly just if you have that mindset of, I want to front load for success and lay the groundwork, that is a great place to hover in. Now, unfortunately, you can't just hover there, because even when you're on your proactive A game, when you're at your very best, you're anticipating everything and you are just really, in that mind space, there will still be times, of course, when you need to respond to unwanted behaviors. We, the adults, respond to keep behaviors from escalating, and to help children learn from their mistakes. So on the next slide, just a quick reminder that, and before I share some of our reactive strategies, that remember that when a group of children are together, conflict happens. Conflict is actually a necessary part of play, because children when they join together, things disrupt what they're playing, right? And three things typically disrupt what they're doing. Those three things are space, like there's not enough of it, or I want to be here too, or I want to be riding, like a quick park example is I want to be on that swing and there's only two swings and they're taken. So you can't all be in that same space at that same time. Another thing that disrupts play is a conflict over materials or resources. You've undoubtedly seen this again and again. And then the most exciting one, I think, is a conflict over ideas. This is so exciting because when children are feeling, a dilemma over which idea it should be, that means they're really deep into their play. They're really deep into cooperative play, and that, the storylines are singing and they just are really playing in the kind of way that we would want them to. And then it's just, they need some scaffolding, some help to start to see that listening to others' ideas actually helps your play get even more exciting. But so if space, materials, resources, ideas, if one or more of those are impacting how a child feels or how other children feel, then conflict does arise. We want to help children start to learn to identify what's making them feel, making the conflict happen, because it's easier than to communicate with others. And once you're aware of which source is causing the conflict, then you're going to be better at solving it. So that's just a quick reminder. At the end, I'm going to call out a parent education session from last year that talks a little bit more about conflict. So that resource is going to be noted. Okay, so just like I talked a little bit about the mindset of being proactive, here we have empathy, understanding, and curiosity. The cooperative school mindset, when reactivity is needed, is one of empathy and understanding and curiosity, because we want to assume the best of all children. And having empathy and understanding doesn't mean letting go of accountability. We're going to still hold children accountable, but we hold them accountable with understanding and curiosity for why they are displaying the behaviors. And then we have faith that they will learn from our careful reactive moves, which are another way of saying that is a redirection. Okay, so again, many reactive strategies, but I'm just going to call out 3 of the key cooperative school reactive approaches. We have child-to-child conflict resolution. So usually happening between 2 children or a small group, like a few, maybe 3 or 4 sometimes. Then we have problem-solving conferences, which are problem-solving conferences, which sometimes result in contracts, is what I meant to say. And problem-solving conferences, again, happens with a lot of times just one adult and one child, or sometimes one adult and a small number of children. And then finally, we have meetings, which these could be class meetings if you're at school. If you're at home, they would be family meetings, but they can really be any meeting. Like they could be a neighborhood meeting for people in the neighborhood. It could be a team meeting if you have a child that plays on a sports team. So really just a meeting of the group, because more than one or a few children are involved.
And then can I just add, Aimee, that
Yeah.
as Aimee goes through this is not the first time any of the children at the school have heard any of these things, but I will most often call all of those meetings. Does that make sense? So it's like when we say I need a meeting. So the children actually know that they need to come and sit down with me. And it's like one of those things, or sit down with Ada or sit down with Teresa. So it's like, we call them meetings, and so you don't have to introduce this whole concept. So that's because it already exists.
Yes. And I think I would thank you for saying that they're labeled at school as meetings, because yes, of course, a child meeting with a child is a meeting, but I just am naming them more explicitly here to differentiate them, if that makes sense. So
I'm a big fan. I think it's like really good, because that is exactly what Aimee's doing, is actually labeling them the way they are. There are definitely different meetings. So it's the child-to-child conflict resolution that happens. We can sometimes talk to just one child, but generally we talk about meetings. But this is exactly right. So thank you, Aimee.
Yeah. And I wanted to, just before we move on to continue to dive into these reactive strategies, point out that class or family meetings, or when you're gathering a group to have a meeting, that also can happen and should happen proactively. It didn't make my list of 3, but I just wanted to call it out here. Oftentimes when you might do those role-playing scenarios at home, if you want to try those, or step into a story, can happen at a family meeting. So family meetings, class meetings can and should and do at our school happen proactively. So not always because there was a big situation that needs to happen, be resolved, but they can just they can be a check-in time just to front load for success, to get into this habit of having a structure where you do gather and you talk about things. So lots of work can happen in a meeting done proactively. And then of course they can be used reactively. Okay, so let's think about child-to-child conflict resolution. Probably no surprise to you, but children do need coaching to learn how to resolve conflict. And what we try to do at our school is, when guidance, and of course, guidance will be necessary, but the children are encouraged to discuss the purpose of their play and just to stick with describing their own actions using I statements, instead of doing the he did this, she did this, they did this kind of talk. You're just talking about yourself. And then to come up with ideas for better approaches to the play or to the interaction. A lot of the adult in this instance typically needs to offer reasonable yet limited choices that could assist the children in reaching their own solution. We do like to turn the responsibility over to the children to decide, but sometimes the reasonableness and some of the ideas for the choices come from the adult. Well, I should say the ideas come to make sure that they are reasonable. And then the children are verbalizing their own feelings. And this again comes back to an adult modeling that process. And we talked a little bit last month about the emotion wheel, or just expanding emotional vocabulary, and having a more well-versed emotional vocabulary helps a lot for a conflict resolution session. And also this, like I was saying before, that we want to help children learn from their mistakes when we are reactive. You can kind of see how conflict resolution and redirection in this way can be used to teach the vocabulary, the behaviors and social skills that are required for cooperation, among and between children. So in this child-to-child conflict resolution session, it's most certainly in the beginning initiated by the adult. The adult is initiating the dialogue between the children to make sure the children, both are heard, or in the case of 3 or 4, that all children's voices are heard. The adult can observe. Also, a lot of times the adult might have observed the situation and can report their observations, but definitely want to ask for the children's input. I think it's important here that you're directly modeling what words to use. You've probably, common parenting phrase I've definitely spurted out myself a couple times is when someone's screaming and you're telling them to use your words, tell me, but they actually don't have these words. So we are here as the adult to provide the words, to model the words. And maybe you might start to see a link how if you are in a habit of proactively doing those role-playing scenarios, the iMessage charades or stepping into a story, that's just another time for your child to practice the language of conflict resolution, especially if you use some scenarios, if you make up some scenarios that are just like kid to kid conflict, and what, a child says to you that you're not their friend, and then what will you do? And you've already kind of laid the groundwork for the kinds of words you might use. Okay, just two more slides about child-to-child conflict that I think are key, and I don't want to move past without saying that I didn't really mean to say move past and then move past again, but anyway, alas. I wanted to say that we do move past just saying sorry at our school. It's a key component to our approach to conflict resolution, plus to social emotional development. Our teachers teach this because for many reasons, but mainly because it's foundational in understanding and practicing consent for seeing other people, and especially in observation of reconciliation and anti-racist practices. You can't just say sorry and then move on. So at our school, the teachers talk about throwing the word sorry around. Like when you casually throw a word around, it's like it really doesn't even have a meaning, or it doesn't matter. It's easy to say sorry. And then the teachers work on what children might say, and children and people and adults, right? Of course, there's times when adults need to make amends to what they might say instead of sorry, because children and adults have to own their actions. And then here's kind of the process to own your actions, to describe what happened, acknowledge the hurt, and provide a solution. Of note, like sorry might be useful after that too, but really the other pieces here in this process are what's important to make amends. And then similarly, we move past just saying sorry, and on the next slide, which almost looks identical to this one, we move past just saying it was an accident. Because when you think about it, running straight towards the phrase "it was an accident" may be another way to divert or dismiss. In other words, it's like a way to quickly move past a conflict without dealing with it. It seems maybe easier and nicer to use the word accident, but saying it was an accident won't make another person actually feel better. And it teaches that you don't need to take care to see and know, where other people are, what other people are doing. And it's the same process to own your actions and describe what happened, acknowledge the hurt, and provide a solution. Just like in a quick example, if one child bumps into another child and didn't intend to do that, it's a little bit different to go through their process to say, I bumped into you. So that's owning what happened, and that's owning your role in it. And you fell down, you're crying. I know that means you're hurt. Can I help you up? Can I help you go over to your mother? Can I, or provide a different solution, but some sort of solution providing there. Cool. So on the next slide, I just wanted to tell you, I just put this phrase, apology of action, because this at school with the students I teach and at home with my own children, I call this process of moving past sorry and moving past it was an accident, apology of action, showing that there is actually an amends process that happens, like you're taking action. It's just an idea. Our teachers don't use apology of action, even though like they use that process. I just was putting a name in case that helps, if that resonates, to think of it in that way. Okay, so that was a little bit about child-to-child conflict. And now let's talk a little bit about problem-solving conferences, which is a little bit different because an adult is involved in this process. So, and as I mentioned, when I was introducing the 3 reactive strategies, sometimes a contract results from a problem-solving conference. So this is a situation where you have an individual child, or in some cases, a few children together, but typically a problem-solving conference is private, and it's like a one-on-one discussion between an adult and a child that allows both people to discuss one specific problem, and then they want to identify its possible causes and brainstorm potential solutions. So in a problem-solving conference, children are definitely given a voice because adults are trying to learn what's really going on. And back to the mindset of being reactive, which I should say sometimes there does need to be a cooling off period because adults are humans too. And so we sometimes need a little moment so that we can go back to that reactivity mindset of empathy, understanding, and curiosity, because we want to approach something with understanding and curiosity for why the behaviors were displayed. We want to assume the best in all children. So, you're really trying to figure out what's going on, kind of taking a stance like a anthropologist or something. Children often do have insights into their own behaviors and needs, because their insights might be things we've never thought of before. And then the adults are going to begin with the assumption of the children's good intentions and not make quick negative judgments when incidents occur. Go back to, you might need a cooling off period before you can come with that mind space. And it's helpful for the adult to do like a little bit of prep work. I'm not talking like take notes on a notebook and like research something. I mean, just like kind of get it together in your head, about how that's going to go when you sit down. And just, this is like a list of the steps you might follow. So when you actually sit down together and you're in the right mind space, you want to name the behavior as a problem, what happened, and name that is a problem. Discuss why it is a problem and why it is important to resolve. And then you kind of want to think about the cause, come to a shared understanding of why that happened. This is when the child voice is helpful, so you can have some insights. You could ask questions like, might it be because, or could it be, or why do you suppose you did? And then you're going to set a clear, specific goal to work on. Generate some solutions, like some possible solutions, and then pick one to try. And then the important thing at the end is to follow up by checking in to see how it's going. And this is where the contract could come in. So I'm thinking about one of my children's cooperative school classmate. This child is now in 3rd grade, but this was a classmate of his for 3 years at the Purple School. And we were having dinner with them at their house, and I saw a contract on their fridge of and they're just, you know these children, so it's just kind of cute to see what might be a hiccup at home that's like never a hiccup when you see this child yourself. But the contract had a clear, specific goal that the child was going to work on, and then like the steps the child was going to take instead of doing the undesirable behavior. That was all listed out, like instead of blank, I could. And there was a couple options, probably 3, because the 1, 2, 3. And then it was signed by the child, and actually the adult signed this one too. And it was posted on the fridge. So that was like a place that could easily be referred to and referenced during the check-in process, the how's it going process. And we have on the next slide, I think there's 2 examples of different kind of contracts. And so I should say, the contract I was just referring to was written, it was actually written by a 3rd grader, but a lot of times when you might be doing this with a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, etc., the adult can write it. That's one way a contract can look. It can be like adult handwriting. These are different than that, of course, quite obviously. Leslie, will you talk a little bit about these contracts?
I didn't know what that thing was called, that tower. So this happens in the tracks class because they've been introduced to contracts, so they kind of pick it up themselves in order to solve some of their the interaction. That's what these 2 are. These are about play that they each had, and so the one on the left is that this is what will happen if we aren't able to share this contract, and the tower, and those are all the people that are going to get fallen on. And anyway, there's the signature there up at the top, and then on the right is a contract between children that says witches only for 1 day. So I wrote the witches for only 1 day, and then they wrote all the rest of the child wrote all the rest of it because they wanted to create a pattern for the play arc that they were developing. So in this agreement, they didn't want to have the witches every day. They just wanted to have it every other day. So, or actually for 1 day, they actually ended up doing it every other day. So that the contract on the left is about consequences that happen if the rules aren't followed or the agreement's not followed. And then the contract on the right is actually setting up a pattern. So I think that what we don't have an example of is what Aimee is talking about, that we have examples all the time of where we sit down with children and we write out the like we name the thing that's happening together, the things that aren't working. A lot of this happens proactively because we talk about how our day went, what went well, what didn't, that kind of thing. And then so the language is already there. And then it's actually pretty straightforward to write solutions, because the children most often come up with them just with the barest of suggestions. So we do 3 solutions, usually we try to, and then they sign their names at the bottom, and I sign my name or don't sign my name. It depends on how the child feels about it. And then at the school, we do post them. So it's like you can sometimes find these things posted places, and that's where they get posted, or if they get posted actually is it is sourced from the child. So that's really important because it's their contract. And then following up with it, you have to narrate and recognize when the contract is working. So you can't just, write it and think everything's going to be magical. You have to like really kind of come back to it often and say, oh, here we go. We've got evidence of this. Look, you're doing it. So, oh, sorry, I'm moving the
Whoops, I was muted. Okay, that's good. And yes. So then our third reactive strategy that we'll dive into is meetings, like the class meeting, family meeting, neighborhood meeting, soccer team meeting. And you want to try a meeting as a reactive strategy when, of course, the agreed on rules aren't working, but the problem affects everyone or most everyone in the group. And it's not that more individual kind of need. Also, you want to try a meeting when you're open to child input. A meeting is different than me as your parent just like laying down the law of like the soccer spikes aren't coming in the house anymore. Because sometimes I need to do that, right? They smell, they are so muddy, and they have to stay outside. That's just like a no choice. A meeting would be if I really wanted to hear the other family members' input about what to do about the soccer spikes. So you have to be open to having, sometimes there's non-negotiables and they don't require a meeting is what I mean by that. So, and again, just like one more quick reminder that you can use a meeting as a proactive strategy to lay the groundwork for success. But in this case, you're using it as a reactive strategy, it can be helpful to bring the whole group together in a structured meeting when a problem moves beyond a single child or a few children, because meetings give everyone in the group a chance to weigh in on the problem, to suggest possible solutions, and find a solution on which you can reach the agree to agree, where members of the group can be satisfied with the solution. And then the meetings can follow a similar structure to the one that I talked about just a moment ago in the problem solving conference, where you're naming the problem and telling why it's a problem, thinking about the cause, coming to a shared understanding about that, and then setting the clear specific goal to work on, coming up with some solutions, picking one to try. And then checking back in on that. Okay, so I had 2 scenarios, but Leslie, you have to just skip them because I'm looking at the clock and I know we have some other things to do, and I just want to do the tip from home, unless you disagree with me on this choice.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Well, let's do the tip. Let's do the tip for home.
Yeah, the one redirecting against play, we could circle back to if we somehow have time. And it's the one before that, well, it doesn't.
Oh, okay.
You think?
No, it's okay. It's okay. Let's revisit it in another way. Let's do this one. Yeah.
Let's do the tip for home. Okay. So today's tip for home is again about how to scaffold children's interactions. And this is a tip about managing play dates. And this would be a proactive things to consider. So Leslie, you can go to the next slide where there's some tips there. And I would say this is the cooperative school way to plan and host a play date. And so some proactive tips to consider would be to rotate, which just means rotate through the class roster. Instead of like asking a child to choose who to come over to play, you could just you just set up a system of rotation. Like you just do, if you're in the leaves class, you do the blue team, then the yellow team, then the red team. Or if you don't, I mean, of course, you go to our school. That's why you're here. That's why I talked about the class roster, but you could also rotate through neighborhood children or teammates or whatever. And then another proactive tip to consider is to plan the play date in advance with your child, which means you could choose the location. Will the play date happen inside? Will it happen outside? Will it happen at the park, the forest, in your backyard? Which toys will be part of the play? You can think about, the play storyline or the play arc, as we call them at school, that you might play. You can talk about how play arcs will work, like the pattern of play. You'll choose a storyline, then the play date person will choose a storyline, then you get to choose one. And then you can review when the play date person arrives, you can review the plan together. And then you want to stick to it. So stick to the plan and stick to ending the play date when you said it would end. For early play dates, you probably want to plan on keeping them short and sweet. And just one other tip to think about, if your child is struggling with another child, it's probably time to host and plan a play date with that child. Okay, so for additional resources, I just have 3 quick things to draw your attention to. The weekend reviews, for if you want to do a deeper dive into proactive and reactive ways to manage children's interactions. You could read all 3 class weekend reviews. Leslie, wait, is that what oh yes, I see. Never mind. Anyway, I have the tracks screenshot here because in the most recent tracks weekend review, Leslie talks a little bit about against play, which is the slide that we had to just skip. But anyway, it's worth a read. That's why I didn't mention it before. I was confused. And another additional resource is the school's YouTube channel, which has all of our parent education recordings. The recording of March 2022, which is entitled Conflict Resolution, might be one of interest to you because it was all about conflict and play. And then finally, just a remind you this school year, I don't think, that we have a blog called Growing Together, written by our teachers and sometimes guest authors. And this is found on the outward-facing Tacoma Park Cooperative Nursery School website that's available to anyone on the internet, different than our member site.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I am Yasmin Khan. I'm the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director on Purple Schools Board. And tonight, I'm going to speak to you for a little bit about incorporating Indigenous representation in your general life as an adult, and then also some suggestions on how to do that with your kiddos as well. Now, how do I share my screen? Share screen, okay. Sorry, it's not working. Hang on, it's not working. So does someone else want to chat
Leslie?
for a second? You want to take some pictures while I'm trying to make it work?
Hold on. Yeah. So do you want to get off that spotlight you poured this? So, let me, okay, there you go. And you, right. And take your time, Yasmin. So just it's okay. And I just want to make sure that I have this, your sharing set up properly. So I do want to go, while we can, that just touch base, that playing against looks like tag. It's also something that we talk about a lot. So playing against looks like tag, running from, it's usually fast motion. And we talk about that in the week in review. So thank you, Aimee. I went back and looked at the slide. So I think that's good. And so we have that covered. But just let me look at you to make sure. Yeah, you have the share. Wait, do you? And then hold on, there might be some questions here. Yeah, Grace and Aimee too. I really like that. One of the things that I really like about bringing things into cues is that polygy of action is really important. It's something that we do every day at school, this acknowledging like what we did. And I just really like having that phrase, Aimee. That's really nice. Oh, go to people, right click, make your code. I did. Let me double check, Laura. Hold on just a second. Yeah. I've got it. How do you feel? Is it working?
I don't
Yes,
know.
I don't know why, but I have sharing privileges on my screen. So if you want to forward me your PowerPoint, I can move it forward for you.
Yeah.
Do you have my email address? Okay.
And then I'm going to make you co-host so that you can share.
I already have sharing privileges. I can see that I can share.
Oh my gosh, everybody can then. Let me just look. Let me just do a big party.
Okay, Kuna, I just shared it with you. Can you see it?
I have it, and give me a moment and I'll do the right thing. And no judgment on how many tabs I have open before I turn this into a slideshow. Can folks see her slideshow? All right.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Kuna. Sorry about that. So to get started, you can go to the next slide, Kuna. Thanks. So for folks, for all of us, this is like our version of a land acknowledgement. We are on Piscataway Nation land, and the nation has only very recently gotten federal recognition. And if anyone is interested in the longer story of that, I'm happy to tell you offline or answer a question later, but it's, I think, only been since like 2012. And next slide, Kuna. They ask that if you are so inclined and if you are able to make sure that land acknowledgements of them are not empty performative gestures. They have both one-time land tax or rent payment and monthly rent land tax options that they have available for all of us who are living as settlers on their land to pay to them. They interestingly used to have a museum in the region and used to do cultural programs, and they've closed both. And they are very deliberate about the fact that they're no longer teaching the wider like settler colonial world anything about their culture, and they're interested in two things, which are basically the Land Back project, and also, basically reparations of any kind that are provided to them, however that comes. So in order to make sure that this isn't an empty beginning to this presentation, I wanted to offer. And the link is there, the piscatawayindians.com. That's the direct link so that you can do that. And afterwards, in the notes that come out after the member meeting, this link will be there as well. Okay, next link, Kuna. Next slide. Okay, so as I was thinking about what to talk about for this member meeting, Indigenous Peoples Day was approaching, and I came across this painting called The Scream by a Cree artist named Kent Monkman. And I just found it so arresting, and I've never seen a depiction of, the forced removal of Native children from any Native folks. Like, I've never seen a depiction of this. I've only heard about it in, very kind of general terms, in a very historical setting where there's no adjectives, there's no details, there's no agony, when obviously it must have been an agonizing experience for generations and generations of Native folks to have their children kidnapped from them, basically for their whole childhoods, to be sent away to residential schools. So I wanted to share this painting with everybody because you really get a sense of this horror, and as some of the children here you can see are as little as our littles that, come to Purple School, and the whole reason we're all together. I really wanted us to take a minute to take a look at it. And the artist is incredible, and I absolutely recommend checking out their work. Next slide, Kuna. For folks who might not be aware or don't know a ton about it, the horror of the residential school system started in the US, and then several decades later was admired by white settler colonial administrators in Canada, and decided that it should be replicated there and set up. And the schools were deeply white supremacist and Christian supremacist in their aims, and the guiding principle of them was this quote at the top, this horrendous quote at the top, that the founder of the Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania, which was one of the biggest, and I think the first in the US, or maybe not the first, but it was definitely one of the biggest. It was there. It was a unbelievably brutal experience. It went on in Canada from the late 1870s all the way until 1996. And as far as I could tell, that the schools started in after 1819 in the US, and the federal government has records until 1969. So I'm not clear if that means that the schools went on after 1969 and the federal government just no longer has the records or what, but it was an incredible amount of time, generations and generations, that it happened to. Recently, it's come up in the news because unmarked graves of Native children have been found at these schools in Canada. Initially, it was small numbers, and now the numbers exceed 1,300 unmarked graves of children, of Native children at these residential schools. Because this is such a big part of the Canadian settler colonial, project, there was this, there have been sort of truth and reconciliation type investigations done. So they have a lot more information about how many children were taken and how many children have died. But in the US, we don't have a comparable database of information, and no one has looked at that. Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland she announced an initiative to start doing that kind of investigation here. So I guess stay tuned. Next slide. These are some books that exist in the Purple School, in the vast Purple School collections that specifically deal with residential schooling. And I know it's books that the teachers do use with the kids, and they're really beautiful, really, really beautiful, touching books. They're illustrated gorgeously. And please ask Leslie for more info about them. But definitely check them out if you've never read them before. They're a great place to start talking about this with your kiddos. Next slide, please. So when we talk about marginalized folks who have experienced structural oppression, especially in historic context, we cannot only talk about the trauma and the oppression that they have experienced. And luckily for us, the last few years have been watershed moments for Native representation in American media. And there have been so many wonderful things to watch and to support. And Rutherford Falls is in the timeline of last year, the first one that came out. It's the first, it's hilarious. It's so wonderful. It centers Native folks and Native stories. It's run by it had the first Native showrunner in any television comedy and like any television show period, I think, and has one of the biggest writers' rooms in terms of Native representation. There's 5 Native writers in the room. It's a largely Native cast and crew. It is extremely funny. It ran for 2 seasons, and now they're trying to find more folks. The cast is incredible. Please watch it. Do yourself the favor. It's wonderful. It's on Peacock. But for our friends who might believe in finding content other ways, I'm sure you could find it other ways as well. Next slide. You might have heard about or already watched Reservation Dogs. It's the next show that has a Native showrunner, and it actually is completely like Native, pretty much completely Native cast and crew, and certainly completely Native writers' room. And all of the directors that have directed the episodes are Native as well. It is a triumph. It is everything. It's funny and beautiful and sad and poignant, and you won't forget it. So for grown-ups, watch it. It's so wonderful. And so Reservation Dogs, I feel like, is a little bit more, they're not explaining things along the way. You just have to watch. And it's really a story told, I think, for Native viewers. And we're just so lucky to be along for the ride. Whereas Rutherford Falls is, I think, equal in that way, but because Ed Helms is one of the main characters, and that there's a lot more white people in that cast, and the story is a bit different. It's a little more like a normal sitcom, in that it's always aware of the majority non-Native audience that's watching too. Next slide. I have talked about this film to some of you already. This film is so amazing. It is called Prey. It is the prequel to the Predator films. It's the first film to have ever been completely done in Comanche. And when you watch the mostly English version, the characters speak Comanche throughout it, and it's pretty amazing. I don't think I had ever heard any characters or actors in anything I've ever watched speaking Comanche, so it was pretty amazing. It's set in 1719. It's pretty historically accurate in terms of how they're depicting the culture and what folks are wearing, and how these folks in the Northern Great Plains experience Europeans also, in completely aside from the alien predator, but these colonial predators as well. It is amazing, and it's an incredible look at what storytelling is like when representation is centered so completely, where Native folks are in charge of the story and cinematography and everything else. It's incredible. It's scary, and it's a thriller for sure. So if you're not into action movies where there is, blood and things that are like really tense, then this is not for you. But if you are, then it's great. Next slide, please. So Molly of Denali is wonderful for like even just for the adults to watch. It's so wonderful. It's on PBS. It is an incredible story about this very resourceful young Alaskan Native girl named Molly. It's an incredibly multiracial cast that depicts what Alaska is like, and all the stories about problem solving and community. They directly deal with the legacy of colonization and settler colonial policies historically in terms of segregation and in terms of the residential schools, and in happier ways as well in terms of Alaskan Native representation. So the ethos of the school is not pro-screen. It's like anti-screen. So I'm not like, as a board member, I'm not endorsing that you watch screens with your kiddos, but if your family already does watch screens with your kiddos, then please watch Molly of Denali. It is so lovely. If you do not do screens, Molly of Denali also has an incredible podcast that's very well produced and is really lovely to listen to, where you can still interact with the stories and the characters, but in an audio format where there's no screens involved. So I cannot hype Molly of Denali enough. All of the way that they do the storytelling is incredible. And pretty much the last thing, just to touch on like how directly it relates to our kids, is that, positive racial and ethnic identity is important especially for kids of color, and being able to see not just a direct mirror of who you are, but lots of other types of kiddos too, is really important. And one of the ways that we talk about Molly of Denali in our home is we talk about the way that Molly uses her native language, and other Native folks in the show use their native language interspersed with English, and talk about how it's so important to hold on to heritage languages as a family, working to keep our heritage language alive, and how colonization impacts the South Asian diaspora, and how colonization has impacted Alaskan Native people and Native folks in settler colonial settings and context in North America as well. And it's so affirming. So I really recommend, however you want to interact with it. There are books, they have, it's wonderful, and I recommend it. Next slide. So these are some of the other books that are in the Purple School Library. They are by Indigenous authors, featuring Indigenous kiddos and Indigenous stories. The books, especially that are illustrated by Julie Flett or by her, are so beautiful, like so beautiful. We have a few in our own collection here at home, but I read all of them. I spent one Trax day inside the Purple School going through 3 of the bookcases, and these were the books, this pile that I read, that I found that were so wonderful. And I'm sure there's so many more, but since there's so many books, these were as many as I was able to find in one sitting. Can you go to the next slide, Kuna? There's this one, and then there's, I think, one more slide, or maybe 2 more. Yeah, there we go. So these are the 2 books both written by and illustrated by Julie Flett as well. So that is my short, hopefully sweet, um, small guide, just a quick tips on how to incorporate Indigenous representation and learning more, both for the grownups and the kiddos in your home. So who is next? Oh, I see Kuna's question. How do kids get access to the library these days? So I think what we're supposed to do is look on the member site at the collection, the list virtually, and then we can look in our local libraries for those books. That's correct, right, Leslie?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we'll bring the books out depending on if it's raining. So the books are set up in a reading like we'll set up the reading library, but most of the books that you presented are formally presented. So it's like they're formally taught, and especially those first two. The first two are really key. So, which are stolen words. You build a whole curriculum around just that book. Mm-hmm.
So the last item that we had on the agenda was board introductions. However, given the time, I think we're going to put that next month so that everybody does get a chance to meet the board, but doesn't have to stay past our usual stop time to do that. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Kuna, for stepping in. Thank you, Yasmin. Thank you, Aimee. That was seamless. So thank you so much. Having the spotlight on is very intense. Let me just stop recording. Okay.